I hear that we've got unemployed GPs, okay? I hear that we've got a lack of GP appointments. So I've got this great idea that you as a practice owner or whatever, why don't you just employ a GP? Because wouldn't that solve it?
Okay, yes. So much like dentists, GP practices are private. So when the NHS was set up, GPs stayed out of the NHS family, and we have a contract with the NHS to deliver care to patients. So we are bound to the terms of the contract. So the government will decide every year what's in the contract and how much money to give us for patients. Unlike dentists, we have quite a lot of boundaries in that contract that stop us working elsewhere. So we have extremely limited financial input outside of that contract. So even though we're private with an NHS contract, we can't really do any extra private work on top. We can do a very small amount within certain limits, but we can't just go out there and do a load of work to bring in extra cash. So we're stuck really with whatever the government gives us per patient.
How much is that?
It varies from location to location across England, and it varies based upon your patient cohort where you are. So how old your patients are, how rural they are, how deprived they are. So there's a formula to figure it out. But if you guesstimate that one patient in the NHS to a GP practice attracts a fee of roughly £150 a year. Now, for £150 a year, you may never see your GP or anybody in your practice, and therefore that is money that goes into the practice that pays for the running of the practice. Or you might have a patient who goes 30 or 40 times a year for that £150. So it all sort of comes out in the wash where it middles out. So if I was being really blunt and rude, I would say as a GP practice, I want patients who are young, fit and well, who do not come to see me, and I want as many of them as possible. Because I'll get loads and loads of cash, I can build a beautiful building, you'll walk in, there'll be gleaming marble everywhere, and I'll turn up in my Ferrari, and I'll have no patients to see. That is the nirvana. That's what GPs are looking for. Whereas in reality, what we have is a growing population in England, an ageing population in England for all the right reasons, because we've been more successful in treating diseases, we have antibiotics, people are living longer, people are working longer, that's great, but with all of that comes extra diseases. With all of that comes more appointments in the NHS with your GP practice to keep you healthier, fitter for longer, or if you're not healthy and fit, we keep you plodding on as long as you can. So you don't see us 3 times a year anymore like you used to. You might see us on an average 6 times a year now. So the average number of times you go to a GP practice has slowly crept up. So we've got older patients, sicker patients, and more attendance at the practice. More money has gone into the NHS and has gone, in theory, into general practice, but hasn't gone into general practice pockets to spend. So that money that's come through, that's been invested in general practice, it's almost like the best description I've been given so far is if I tell you to go paint your house, and I'm going to give you paint to do it, but I'm going to give you 50 tester pots, and that's all you're going to get. Make it stretch. That's it. There's no money. I'm not going to tell you to go out and buy your own paint. I'm going to give you these pots, and they're very specific, and you've got to make it stretch, and you've got to make it last. That's kind of how finance works in general practice. Here's your pot. Here's how to spend it. Make it work. So I don't have spare cash sat around to employ a GP. What I've got is money in an account that I can spend upon a pharmacist, upon a physiotherapist, upon a counsellor, upon the building rent. But that money cannot be used for me to buy a GP. So I can spend it on my staff, and whatever I've got left over, quite frankly, is not enough to afford a GP. So GPs are going unemployed because practices can't afford to pay for them because we have allocations for the money that we're given.
Okay. Anybody got anything else to ask on that one? So, I'm going to take it because first of all, the question is, am I right? Which is a yes or no, which then I'll explain why. So, am I right that pharmacists and GPs will have, when it comes to such things like checking blood pressure and such things as vaccine, you both have access to that same pot of money? Am I right that that is sort of the case? Because if I am, my question then is, doesn't that put GPs and pharmacists absolutely competing with each other for the same pot of money? And if that is the case, how on earth does that benefit the patient? You two being in...
Do you want to take this?
Yeah, I thought you'd pass it to me. Yes, kind of, but the vaccination service is different to what you've described with blood pressure. And if we could do a whole day on pharmacy funding, and I would probably need somebody with far greater expertise than myself to get into the intricacies of that. But if we take flu vaccines, for example, yes, what you've just described is kind of the scenario we find ourselves in. And it's a bit daft, basically. But if you think about it, if you've got two professions that are both striving to actually get more people vaccinated, ultimately you're going to end up with a population that hopefully will have a greater vaccination rate. So there's kind of a bit of an incentive there from a government perspective, I guess. But is it right that if I'm running my pharmacy that's next door to Dean's practice, which it isn't, by the way, but if it were, is it right that Dean and I would be in competition trying to pull people off the car park to come in through our door to have their flu vaccine? And that's the reality that we are kind of seeing play out in real life at this moment. And the reason that that's significant is because the money that comes into both professions is so critically important to them to keep their private businesses open. Now, it would be lovely, and I think we're both on the same page with this, to have some form of commissioning arrangement where it'd be great if we could work together. And Dean said, well, do you know what, Joe? I really struggle to get this list of people to come into my GP clinic for flu. How about you have a go and trying to contact them and see if they want to come into the pharmacy instead? And I go, yeah, you know what, that's great. And actually by the end of it, we get as many people vaccinated as possible and we do a bit of a gain share in terms of the money. That to me would make better sense. I'll probably get myself shot for saying this publicly, but that to me has got to be something that we need to strive towards. The challenge we have is that because the contracts are all built in their silo, you don't always get that very joined up thinking. And blood pressure is another really good example of where that joined up thinking doesn't really work. And the idea has been that, yeah, you know, pharmacies are really accessible, be great. They've got a key role to play in terms of trying to help prevent people from getting poorly. And actually, yeah, go into a pharmacy, get your blood pressure checked if you're over 40 and you've not had it checked for 5 years. That's a great idea. But what's happening is it's creating work that is then transferring back into general practice, and there's no remuneration attached to that for general practice. So we're solving an issue in one part, but we're creating an issue in another part of the system. And again, we just need a little bit more joined up thinking. I've answered that in a very simplistic way.
No, it was
you may
beautiful.
well want to add into that.
Joe answered it in such a beautiful way. Well done, and politically correct too. I'm less politically correct. So to be slightly more blunt about what Joe has just really beautifully said is that if in a pharmacy, Joe perhaps is in her pharmacy one day and she checks somebody's blood pressure because it's good clinical practice, it's great to do, and she gets paid for it. Why wouldn't she? Her role then is to pass that number to me for me to do something with. Now, I'm not paid to do anything with that number. All that's done is just turned up the number of times that my patient turns up to me. And I've just told you what the nirvana is. The nirvana is I want healthy, fit people who don't come to me. The last thing I want is Joe finding 1,000 more people to send to me. And that's exactly what she's trying to do.
Yeah, do it.
Your pharmacy cohort are going out there looking for sick people and saying, here, come and see Dean. Now, that's clinically the right thing to do. It's brilliant for patients. It's brilliant for healthcare, and we should encourage that. But the contracts and the financial movement are perverse. It makes me hate it because I can't afford to deliver the service, because I can't pay for a nurse. I can't pay for a doctor. I don't have the staff to deal with the thousands of people you're sending my way. And that's the issue. Really, the resources and finance need to follow the patient. And we don't have brilliant communication at the top level in England of the people negotiating these contracts. So Joe's senior team will negotiate a contract, and on paper it looks brilliant. Yes, we should do that. But they won't talk to my team. My team will have no idea that we've just been stitched up.
And vice versa.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Not just blaming pharmacy there. So because, thank you, because of that lack of joined up thinking, we have animosity towards patients which isn't right. We have a system that doesn't work and doesn't benefit clinical care for patients.
Just to be unpolitically correct, and we've also got dentists at the end there, that I can come and see you and it's free. Okay,
yep.
My NHS is free. I can go to Pharmacy First, which we'll come to in a minute, and it's free. I go to an NHS dentist and I'm paying. At what point is that community and
Do you want to know how that came about?
Oh, go on. Does anybody else want to know why we pay for the dentists and nobody else?
Before you do, Richard,
Yeah.
I have to say, it's not free. It's not free. It's free at the point of access, but it's not free. You all paid for it. Through high taxes, and we've just had a budget, so we know how much that is.
So we all get taxed more as from
Yes,
June, don't
yes,
we?
yeah.
So you should be getting more money. We won't answer that one. So why do we pay?
So in 1948, there was a guesstimate about the amount, because up until that point, all dentistry was private, and there was a guesstimate about how much work was out there to do. There was a ton more than anybody guesstimated. There was an awful lot that was being done. And so by 1951, they realised that they bust the budget, and so they introduced patient charges called a co-payment, I believe. And the purpose of the co-payment is two things. One is damp down demand. They knew that if you introduce a charge, the number of people going through the system will go down, and also to rake in some money to help pay for the system. Like I said, it's 900 million out of 3.3 billion. So it's give or take a third, isn't it now? There are exemptions. There's certain benefits that will exempt you, pregnant and nursing mums. So there are exemptions where it is free, but basically, and this causes, patients' charges cause, as I've alluded to earlier, conflict in contracting, because the government is dependent on them. They don't want to spend any more. And so any change that they put in where the patient's charges are at risk of dropping, then that causes tension in the system. So yeah, it was free for 3 years.
3 years.
And it's never going back to. I mean, does everybody know how much the patient's charges are for the different bands of treatment? So if you were to go to 111, that would be £27 and some pence. If you go for a band 1 treatment at your dentist, which includes checkup, x-rays, scale and polish, that's a band 1, that's £27 as well. If you then need anything doing, like a filling, this is where patients can benefit to a point. So if you need 1 filling done, you're in a band 2, that's £72 and some pence. If you need 2 fillings done, it's £72 and some pence, 3, 4, 5. But up until relatively recently, where there has been a little tweak in the system, you've got patient and dentist, doctor and patient at loggerheads again. Somebody goes in and needs, I mean, this is another point about access. If you're taking an unknown patient on that might need 6 fillings, you're only going to get paid for 1. But that patient is going to take 6 times the amount of, maybe not 6, but 3 times the amount of time that person so a bit like you want in healthy patients, dentists are just the same. They don't want people that need a boatload of work. Now, there have been methods of trying to adjust this, and can I blow the trumpet for South Yorkshire Integrated Care Board, because last year they end up with what's called non-recurring money in their budget from dentistry. This is money that they might have clawed back out of practices, or practices have said, have that contract back, we're off. Well, last year they had £12.5 million non-recurrent funding in dentistry. If they don't spend it, all that money is lost out of dentistry. It just goes into the Treasury's black hole. So the people of the dental team of South Yorkshire set about spending it by buying access sessions. So there were, I don't know how many of these contracts are left now, if any, but there were contracts put in place where practices were given a sessional fee, and 111s, or they took walk-ins, 111s were directed to those places. The government in its election manifesto promised another 700,000 extra emergency appointments. Has anybody heard of that? So they set about trying to encourage ICBs to do this. South Yorkshire was already in a bit of a problem because it doesn't have 12.5 million non-recurring. It's got something like 4. So pressure was being put on. Is there 48 ICBs? Something of that order. So up until probably about 4 months ago, none of them across the country were meeting their target for these extra 700,000 appointments. South Yorkshire had got something like 20,000. And I felt sorry for the people working in the ICB because their target had been set on last year's target where they'd had 12 million to spend. So central NHS is saying, great, you did that last year, but you've only got 4 million, but we'd like you to do that and another 20,000, which is just a complete ridiculous notion that you must come across that kind of thing in your, all the time.
Yeah, the target setting via central health management in England seems very out of step with local understanding. No. So for us as a frontline clinician, we think our job is hard. The people who organise behind the scenes have an absolutely untenable job. It's just impossible to deliver the national expectations. And frustratingly, every year, of course, our politicians say, we're going to give more, you're going to get this more, this is going to be extra, because it sounds good to taxpayers to say you're going to receive these extra bits and bobs, so it gets votes. But the reality is the people who organise it, they know it's untenable, and us at the front on grassroots also just can't deliver that. So we're constantly trying to catch up to these promises that are undeliverable.
I think we could get political all day, so we won't.